Iris had always considered herself a curious person, but she knew that her curiosity often led her to dark places. That night, as the shadows stretched across the cold stone floor of the old library, she realized she'd crossed an invisible line. The beam of her lantern revealed a shelf full of ancient, dusty tomes, some of them layered with years of accumulated dirt. But as she brushed aside a thick layer of dust, her eyes landed on something that made her freeze. There, half hidden, was a book unlike any other. She pulled the book from the shelf and saw that its cover was made of darkened leather, almost as if it had been soaked in ink until all of its essence was concealed. There was no title, but in the center was a symbol, a serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol of eternity. Her heart raced as she opened the book, and the first few pages were enough to captivate her completely. There were no ordinary words inside, but instead, intricate diagrams, symbols, and words written in an ancient language. Something about those markings felt familiar, as if they whispered long-forgotten secrets. The other alchemists always spoke about the power of knowledge and the danger of unearthing what was meant to stay hidden. But Iris's curiosity was overwhelming. She kept reading, knowing full well that she was stepping into forbidden territory. The text spoke of an elixir that not only prolonged life but promised immortality. She had heard tales of alchemists transforming lead into gold, but the idea that life itself could be manipulated like this was something entirely new. Flipping through the pages, she felt time warp around her. The outside world faded, and she plunged deeper and deeper, as if into a sea of mystery and fascination. The diagrams grew more complex, and her mind buzzed as she tried to decipher them. She knew that if any of it were true, she had stumbled onto something that could change not just her life, but the very nature of the world she knew. When she finally closed the book, the air around her seemed different, denser, and colder. A chill ran down her spine, and for a moment, she wondered if someone had been watching. Leaving the library with the book carefully hidden, Iris returned to her small room, where the walls were lined with books and old scrolls. She knew that the best place to hide the book would be in a chest under her bed, but she hesitated. It felt as though this book couldn't simply be locked away, as if doing so would be rejecting the invitation it seemed to offer. After stowing the book, she sat at her desk, where the flickering light of a candle illuminated her notes. As she organized her thoughts, a mixture of anxiety and excitement filled her chest. She could hardly wait to decode the secrets hidden within that book. She knew that by dawn, her mentor, Master Thomas, might notice something different. He always had an uncanny intuition, and though she didn't know exactly how, she sensed that he would figure out what she'd done. But despite the risks, Iris knew there was no turning back. She stayed awake all night, mentally reviewing the symbols and images she had seen. There was a section that mentioned the price to be paid, but nothing explained exactly what that price would be. Her exhaustion grew more intense, but her mind kept working. She knew that to access the true power of the book, she would have to understand every one of those details. The next morning, Iris woke with a start, as if her mind was still trapped in the riddles of the previous night. The sunlight streaming through the window brought with it a sense of normality, but she knew that nothing was normal. She stood up and noticed that her hands were trembling, maybe from exhaustion or perhaps from anticipation of what was to come. Determined, Iris took the book and headed to the study where she knew Master Thomas would be at this hour. Entering the room, she found him focused on a collection of dried plants and herbs arranged on a workbench. He looked up, his narrowed eyes examining her intently. Iris hesitated for a moment, but her resolve spoke louder. She held the book out to him and watched his expression shift from curiosity to a mixture of surprise and concern. He didn't need to say a word for Iris to understand the gravity of her discovery. Without a word, Master Thomas took the book and opened it to a random page. He read in silence, while Iris waited, feeling like a child about to be scolded. After a few minutes, he finally closed the book and looked at her, his expression grave. "You shouldn't have found this," he said, his voice low and heavy with seriousness. And with those words, Iris knew that she had involved herself in something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The silence that followed seemed to amplify the weight of the room. Iris waited for some other reaction, but her mentor just stared at the book with the look of someone who remembered a long-hidden secret. She began to think that he already knew exactly what the book contained. After a moment that felt like it stretched on forever, Master Thomas handed the book back to her, but his eyes never left her face. His fingers tapped on the table, a rare sign of unease that made her even more anxious. "This book," he began, his piercing gaze seeming to go right through her, "is not just any alchemical manual. It holds knowledge that's been locked away for generations, information that should never be touched by human hands. You have no idea what dangers this book carries." Thomas paused, looking off into the distance, as if trying to recall something. "It's believed to hold secrets about life itself, but it's not something to be taken lightly. There were alchemists who paid with their lives for daring to study it. Others," he hesitated, his expression growing darker, "simply vanished." Iris was unsettled by the implied threat in his words, but something inside her insisted that he was exaggerating. She knew the stories, the myths whispered among scholars, but she believed that many of them were just legends. On the other hand, something about Master Thomas's tone stirred a deep-seated fear. Still, she felt that she couldn't just walk away. Everything she had read pointed her to the idea that eternal life was possible, that ancient alchemists had found the secret, and that she was close to discovering more than any alchemist of her generation. "I understand the danger, but it's a risk I'm willing to take," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't want to show any weakness or hesitation. After all, she knew that her mentor respected determination above all else. However, instead of responding, Thomas looked at her with an expression of disbelief and disdain. He turned, pacing back and forth in the small space, his hands moving restlessly as if trying to grasp something invisible. "Do you really think you understand the danger?" He stopped abruptly, his tone becoming more severe. "This book, Iris, is a trap. It was designed to lure the curious to the edge of an abyss. The secrets it holds may seem tempting, but there lies cloaked in promises. How many before you thought they could unlock its mysteries? How many have been caught in its snare and lost themselves?" The intensity of his words made her feel uneasy, but she tried not to show it. Master Thomas had always been strict, sometimes even inflexible. But this time, there was something personal in his reaction, as if he himself had experienced some kind of loss related to that book. Iris knew he wouldn't tell her anything else if she pushed him, but she also knew that she couldn't forget about it or simply abandon it. She looked down, contemplating the dark and worn cover. It seemed more sinister now than when she had found it, yet it still held an irresistible fascination. The possibility of eternal life was a temptation too powerful to ignore. She finally raised her eyes and met her mentor's gaze, which was still fixed on her. The tension between them was almost palpable, a silent duel of wills that made it clear that whatever answer she gave would be judged carefully. After a few moments, Thomas sighed, his shoulders relaxing a little. "Do what you will, but remember this: some secrets are meant to be forgotten. If you insist on following this path, it's at your own risk. Don't say I didn't warn you." He left the room, leaving her alone with the book, as if his simple act of walking away represented a resigned acceptance that there was nothing more he could do to dissuade her. Iris stood there, processing his words, while trying to steady the adrenaline coursing through her body. Although Thomas had tried to turn her away, he had also left a door open, an implicit sort of permission for her to proceed. It seemed to her a sign that he still believed in her, even if he doubted her choices. She knew she couldn't let this obstacle stop her. On the contrary, he had only strengthened her resolve. Determined to move forward, Iris decided that that very night would be the moment to take the next step. She spent the rest of the day studying the book meticulously, committing every detail, every symbol, and every riddle to memory. The more time she spent immersed in the book's secrets, the more convinced she became that this was her destiny. The idea of quitting simply wasn't an option. Her hands were already shaking with excitement as she anticipated the discoveries to come. As night closed in, Iris felt the tension building in her chest. She knew that from this point on, there would be no turning back. With each page she turned, with each note she took, she was plunging deeper, as if surrendering herself to a bottomless chasm. Even with her mentor's ominous warnings echoing in her mind, Iris's determination only grew stronger with every second. She knew she was entering a path from which there was no return, but the allure of the unknown pushed her to keep going, as if the book itself were calling her to unlock all its secrets, one by one. By dusk, Iris knew she was under the watchful eye of the Order, but adrenaline kept her senses sharp. She stashed the book in a small leather pouch and, before night fully descended, headed to an old cabin on the outskirts of town. It was a hideout she often used for her research, a secluded place where she knew she could focus without interruption. But as she arrived, Iris noticed a shadow moving in the distance. Someone was following her. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm, walking with steady steps to the cabin door. Trying to appear unbothered, she entered and locked the door behind her. Yet, the noises outside quickly confirmed she wasn't alone. They had come after her faster than she'd expected. As she scanned the room, trying to decide her next move, the door was suddenly slammed open, making her jump back. Two hooded men, members of the Order, entered without hesitation. She recognized the symbol on their cloaks, an ancient crest that only the highest-ranking members bore. Iris immediately understood the danger. They were there to retrieve the book, maybe even to silence her, and she knew she wouldn't escape without facing whatever was about to happen. One of the men advanced toward her while the other blocked the doorway, cutting off her only exit. "You know what you're holding, don't you?" one of them said in a cold, calculating voice. Iris backed away, feeling the wall press against her back. She knew that lying or trying to reason with them would be useless. His eyes were fixed on the book in her hands, hungry and determined, as if he were willing to risk everything for that secret. For a brief moment, she wondered what could be so important that it would justify this chase. Without waiting for an answer, the man closest to her lunged forward, trying to snatch the pouch that held the book. She dodged, grabbing a knife she had hidden in her belt and holding it in front of her body, a desperate attempt at defense. Even though she knew the fight was uneven, she decided she wouldn't give up the book without a struggle. It wasn't just fear driving her, but the certainty that somehow, the knowledge in that book was part of her destiny. The knife gleamed in the dim light as Iris tried to sidestep, but the second man grabbed her arm, pulling her close with force. She managed to twist around and land a quick strike, making him step back with a grunt. Her heart pounded as she realized she was in the middle of a fight for her life. Master Thomas's words echoed in her mind, "This book is a trap." But now there was no time for regrets or doubts. Iris saw the man at the door step back, holding a length of iron chain in his hands. She noticed a look of fierce determination on his face, and knew he wouldn't hesitate to use it. Meanwhile, the man who had tried to grab her at first was just a few feet away, breathing heavily but ready to attack again. She quickly assessed her options and realized that even with the knife, she couldn't overpower both of them. In a split-second decision, Iris threw the knife at the man in the doorway and launched herself sideways, grabbing the pouch and darting toward a side window. She hurled herself against the glass, breaking through, and scrambled outside. Without looking back, she ran with all the strength she had, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in her ears as the men pursued her through the forest. She knew she had to lose them. Running between the trees, dodging branches and roots, Iris kept moving, each breath an effort to stay ahead of the men chasing her. Every now and then, she could hear their voices behind her, but the darkness and her speed made it hard for them to catch up. She knew exactly where to hide, a place she knew well, an old abandoned barn at the end of the trail. Upon reaching the barn, Iris slipped inside and hid behind a pile of hay. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she feared they might hear it. The tension made each second feel like an eternity. She knew that if they found her there, she would have nowhere left to run. After what felt like forever, their footsteps faded, and she realized they had lost her trail. Relief washed over her, but she knew it wouldn't be that easy. They wouldn't give up. The order didn't leave loose ends, especially when it came to secrets this deep. As she caught her breath, Iris realized that those men were willing to do whatever it took to keep her away from the truth. Clutching the book tightly against her chest, she knew there was no choice but to keep going. There was something in that book, something larger than her or anyone could imagine. And if she had to, she would take on the entire order to uncover its secrets. Hidden in the old barn, Iris finally let her body relax. But even there, alone in the darkness, her mind wouldn't stop. The book was still clutched tightly in her hands, as if the memory of the recent attack was imprinted on her skin. Her breathing was still uneven, and the cold of the early morning was starting to creep in, but she knew staying there much longer was too risky. The order had already proven they wouldn't hesitate to act. And they wanted her dead, or at least as far from the book secrets as possible. She scanned her surroundings, deciding what to do next, when the sound of footsteps near the barn door made her jump. Instinctively, she held the book tighter, ready to run again, but the voice that echoed out wasn't unfamiliar. "Iris, it's me, Ethan. Come on out, I've lost the guards." She blinked, surprised. Ethan was a childhood friend, someone she'd known long before joining the order. He had disappeared years ago, and Iris had assumed he'd left town or been lost to some dangerous alchemical experiment. Seeing his face brought unexpected relief, though still mixed with the tension of imminent danger. "Ethan? How did you find me?" she asked, slowly emerging from her hiding place. He nodded, signaling for her to follow him. Without further questions, she followed him to a small, abandoned house at the edge of town, which seemed to have become his refuge. The lit fireplace emitted a comforting warmth, and the scent of strong tea hung in the air. Ethan guided her to a chair, sitting across from her, his eyes examining the book she still held. "I didn't know you were still around," she said, trying to hide the relief in her voice. "After you disappeared, everyone thought you'd, well, given up on everything." He smiled, but there was bitterness in his eyes. "Not exactly. But I found something that made me change course. And it seems you found something interesting too." He gestured toward the book with a nod, as if it were a dangerous object. "This book isn't what it seems, Iris. You're running a much bigger risk than you realize." She was tired of warnings. First Thomas, now Ethan. "Are you going to tell me to stop, too?" "Because I'm not going to, Ethan. I've come too far to turn back now. I need to understand what this book means." Ethan let out a heavy sigh, standing up and walking toward the fireplace, where he stared at the flames for a moment, as if trying to organize his thoughts. "The truth is, this book is a hoax. It was created by the Order itself to protect something much bigger. They knew that sooner or later, someone would find it. But that secret of eternal life it promises? It's all a lure, something that never existed." Iris felt a knot forming in her throat. She had spent sleepless nights consumed by that promise, and now Ethan was claiming it was all a lie. If it's a hoax, then why does the Order guard it so closely? It doesn't make any sense. He turned to her, his eyes now more serious than ever. "Because what they're really hiding is the existence of a place they call the Second Earth. A world that few know, hidden but real. The Order uses this book as a veil, a shield to keep anyone from discovering the true nature of what they really protect. Imagine a world where all our deepest fears and desires come to life. That's the secret the Order is trying to keep silent at any cost. She was shocked as she tried to absorb the magnitude of what Ethan was saying. A second Earth? The idea seemed absurd, like something out of an old tale, but the conviction in his voice and the strange glint in his eyes told her he believed every word. If that's true, then why did you come back? Why are you helping me now? Ethan took a step forward, his expression cautious. Because I fell into this book's trap, too. I spent years studying every line, every symbol. And when I finally discovered the truth, I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. The Order left me alone as long as I promised to disappear, but when I heard you were digging into this, I knew it was only a matter of time before they acted. Iris felt a mix of disillusionment and anger. All her determination, all the risks and danger, for a secret that, in the end, was just a facade? But the idea of a second Earth reignited her curiosity. If that were true, then the knowledge they could uncover might change everything, perhaps even give meaning to what she had been searching for from the start. What do we need to do? How can we find out if this place really exists? Ethan looked at her with a knowing smile. I was hoping you'd say that. But to find the portal, we'll need to access hidden documents from the Order, which only the highest members have access to. There will be risks, but if you're determined to go on, then we can try. She nodded, her heart racing. The disillusionment with the book had passed, and now a new mystery lay before her. With the promise of a hidden world and the secrets they might uncover, Iris knew she was ready for any challenge. With Ethan by her side, she had one more chance, not only to understand what the book hid but to go beyond it and explore the second Earth. The Order could try to stop them, but Iris now had a purpose greater than before. She wouldn't rest until every secret was revealed. Iris didn't sleep that night. Ethan's words circled in her mind, like a riddle that couldn't be solved. The second Earth. A hidden world. Every time she tried to rest, a new wave of adrenaline took over her body. By the time the first light of dawn was breaking, she and Ethan had already started planning their next move. He believed that one of the Order's oldest archives, kept in a subterranean chamber, contained the documents they needed to access the portal to the second Earth. They met in a secluded part of town, where Ethan handed her a map. It was old and faded, but it clearly showed the underground passages that led to the secret chamber. As they descended the narrow stone steps, Iris felt the temperature drop, and darkness seemed to close in around them. She held a lantern, but its light seemed swallowed by the vast shadows, giving her the impression that the walls were closing in. Ethan led the way, and she realized he knew those tunnels like no one else. The subterranean corridors were a labyrinth of arches and hidden doors, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and centuries-old dust. When they finally reached the chamber, Ethan stopped in front of an iron door, locked with an ancient mechanism. He pulled a small metal pick from his pocket and, with the skill of someone who'd done this many times, unlocked the door within seconds. Upon entering, Iris felt a sense of awe. The walls were lined with shelves packed with scrolls, ancient documents, and even a few alchemical objects she vaguely recognized from her studies. In the center of the room was a large stone table, and on it, a set of leather-bound manuscripts, carefully arranged. Ethan quickly picked them up, flipping through each one until he found what he was looking for. He handed the document to Iris, and she could hardly believe what she saw. It was a star map, combined with detailed notes about a convergence point between the two Earths. There, it described how the portal could be activated. The inscriptions were complex, and she had to focus to decipher what each symbol meant. It was a star map, combined with detailed notes about a convergence point between the two Earths. There, it described how the portal could be activated. The inscriptions were complex, and she had to focus to decipher what each symbol meant. "This is the way to the second Earth," Ethan whispered, almost as if he feared the secret would vanish into the air if he spoke too loudly. But the Order hasn't allowed anyone to use it for centuries. It's believed that the portal leads to a place where the very nature of the world becomes malleable, something that could be shaped according to the desires and fears of those who cross it. The Order fears the power of a place like that, but at the same time, they cannot destroy it. The idea of a world where fears and desires became real was terrifying, but to Iris, what the Order feared seemed even more intriguing than the risks. She imagined what she might find there, the answers she could obtain, and how it all might expand her own knowledge. At the same time, she knew the Order wouldn't let this incursion go unnoticed. Yet, the sense of urgency and fascination drove her to press forward. Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing in the corridor outside the chamber. Ethan motioned for them to hide behind the stone table as two guards entered. One of them held a torch, and the flickering light cast dancing shadows across the walls. The guards seemed to be investigating, and Iris's heart raced. They couldn't be discovered here, much less with the manuscript revealing the secret of the portal. Ethan looked at her, signaling to remain silent. The guards spent a few minutes examining the room before leaving, but to Iris, those minutes felt like an eternity. When the footsteps finally faded, Ethan pulled her out of the hiding spot, with the manuscript securely tucked under his cloak. He knew they didn't have much time before more guards could return. They exited the chamber and made their way back above ground, hurrying through the back streets until they reached Ethan's refuge. Inside, they laid the manuscript on the table and began to decipher the remaining details. The instructions were complex, involving a series of alchemical preparations and rituals they need to complete before accessing the portal. Each line brought new details, and Iris felt more fascinated with each revelation. She now knew the next step was right in front of her, and despite her exhaustion, the sense that she was on the brink of something monumental filled her with unexpected energy. As Ethan explained the procedures, Iris reflected on everything they had discovered so far. The Order had protected that secret for so long, and now, in their hands, was the chance to understand something that few even knew existed. She wondered what they would find when they crossed into the second Earth and how the Order would react if they realized the extent of what they were about to do. Determined, Iris knew that crossing into the second Earth couldn't wait. They had to act quickly before the Order understood the magnitude of what they were about to accomplish. Ethan looked at her with a determined glint in his eye, and she knew that from that moment on, they were committed to a path with no return. What awaited them on the other side was still a mystery, but Iris was ready to face it. That night, Iris and Ethan were ready for the next step. Following the instructions from the manuscript, they gathered the necessary materials for the ritual. In Ethan's refuge, they meticulously arranged the ingredients, a mixture of rare herbs, crystals emitting a faint glow, and other alchemical components that needed to be combined in precise order. All to open the portal and cross into the second Earth. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The ritual's preparations took Iris's full concentration, but even so, she couldn't shake the fear that the Order might find them before the portal was fully opened. Every second felt crucial, her mind bouncing between the anticipation of what they might discover and the apprehension about what lay beyond. She could sense Ethan's own unease, but his resolve gave her the strength to press on. Once they completed the final step, a dim light began to radiate from the center of the symbols drawn on the floor, forming a kind of shimmering portal that seemed to vibrate, as if attuned to an invisible frequency. They exchanged a quick look, and without a word, they stepped through the portal. The impact was immediate, the sensation was of piercing cold, as if the very air around them had frozen. As she opened her eyes, Iris realized they were no longer in the same world. The landscape around them was distorted, and the colors had an almost unreal glow, a blend of shades she had never seen in the ordinary world. In the second Earth, time and space seemed to operate differently. Sounds were muffled, and every movement created a distant echo, as if the very environment were observing them. Ethan led the way, but both were on high alert. Everything there seemed challenging, even threatening. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed from afar, followed by a shadow that moved rapidly in their direction. Iris knew instantly that the Order had discovered where they were. A group of hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their movements swift and precise. Ethan reacted immediately, pulling Iris behind a rock as the men approached. They wielded weapons that seemed to glisten with a strange energy, something she had never seen before. Iris clutched a small amulet, one of the few items they'd brought from the other side, feeling her heart pound. She knew they would have to fight, but in this world, the rules seemed entirely different. Ethan moved forward, using a kind of alchemical powder he tossed into the air, creating a temporary barrier. The men recoiled momentarily, but their resilience was palpable. They advanced again, and Iris realized they would have to confront them directly. Concentrating, she recalled some words of power she had memorized from the texts, murmuring them softly as she channeled the energy around her. The ground began to tremble, creating a rift between them and the hooded men. It was as if the very earth were responding to her call. But their advantage was short-lived. One of the Order's men raised a shining object and hurled it at Ethan, who tried to dodge but was struck by a burst of energy. He fell, his body limp on the ground, and Iris felt a scream of despair rise in her throat. She ran to him, ignoring the danger surrounding her, and knelt beside her friend. Ethan was conscious, but weak. He looked at her with determination, whispering for her to keep going, that the portal was just ahead. Tears filled her eyes as she promised she would return. She stood up, feeling a surge of fury and resolve. With the amulet still in her hands, Iris focused all her energy, feeling the power of the second earth coursing through her. The men surrounded her, but she knew she had to act fast. In a sudden movement, she unleashed a blast of light that temporarily blinded them, using the opening to run toward the portal. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself were trying to hold her back, but she refused to stop. Finally, Iris reached the portal, where a shimmering veil marked the boundary between worlds. She could feel the energy pulsating, knowing she had only a moment to make her final decision. The guards were closing in, but she already knew what she had to do. With one last look at the world around her, Iris recited the ritual's final words, feeling the portal start to close around her. As the veil closed, Iris looked back, realizing that even if she survived, the second earth would never be the same. But she knew that to preserve the reality she knew, something had to be sacrificed. With the last ounce of her energy, she sealed the portal, feeling a wave of heat and light engulf the space, as if the second earth itself were disintegrating around her. Everything seemed to dissolve into a sea of light until there was nothing left but silence. She collapsed on the ground, exhausted and back in her own world, alone and surrounded by darkness. The pain of losing Ethan was still raw, but she knew the sacrifice had been necessary. She looked up at the sky, where the stars shone in a familiar pattern, and felt that, at last, the Order would no longer control her. The portal had been closed, and with it, the secret they had guarded so fiercely. But as she stood up, Iris realized the amulet was still in her hand, glowing faintly, as if the portal had left one final connection with her. Iris stayed on the ground, echoes of the battle still reverberating in her mind. She felt exhausted, her thoughts scattered, as if part of her was still trapped between the two realities. Looking at her hands, she saw the amulet Ethan had given her, now pulsing faintly, emitting a soft light. The second earth, the portal, and the Order's secrets, all of it seemed distant, yet so close she could almost touch it. Getting to her feet, Iris started walking slowly through the forests surrounding the place where she had reappeared. The silence was complete, and the world around her seemed strangely empty. For a moment, she wondered if she had truly returned or if the portal had left her in some kind of in-between world. But soon, she recognized familiar details in the trees and the gravel path. She was, indeed, back. And still, something in her mind wouldn't settle. The feeling that something remained unfinished followed her like a shadow. As she walked, she remembered Ethan and his sacrifice. The grief hit her hard. She knew that without him, she would never have come this far, and the memory of his expression, urging her to continue even in his last moments, filled her with renewed determination. She promised herself she would honor his memory, that she would somehow preserve what they'd learned about the other world. But first, she needed to understand why the amulet was still with her, as if it were a fragment of the second earth that insisted on staying in her possession. When she returned to town, Iris avoided the main streets and sought refuge in an old hideout she'd used as a child, a small abandoned cabin on the outskirts of the village. There, she could reflect in peace and study the amulet, which continued to emit that strange light. She knew she couldn't go back to the Order. After all she had discovered, she understood they would see her as a traitor, someone who had dared to cross forbidden boundaries. And above all, she knew they wouldn't rest until they had the amulet and erased every trace of the second earth. Iris took the amulet out of her pocket and examined it in the flickering light of a candle. There were tiny inscriptions on the surface, characters she vaguely recognized from her readings on alchemy but which seemed to have been altered, perhaps by the energy it had absorbed over time. When she ran her fingers over the symbols, a strange warmth spread through her body, as if the object were still alive, linked to the world they had come from. She knew she needed more information. Despite everything, there was still one person she could turn to. Master Thomas. Even after the confrontation, she knew he held secrets he hadn't revealed. The next day, Iris waited until twilight to visit Thomas's old home. She entered the house quietly and found him in his study, immersed in old books. When he saw her, he didn't look surprised. "I knew you'd come back," he said, without looking up from the pages. She approached, feeling the tension between them. "You knew all along about the second earth," Iris said, her voice heavy with frustration. "You knew what I would find there, and yet, you let me go. Why?" Thomas finally raised his eyes, reflecting a sadness she hadn't expected. "The Order exists to keep secrets, yes, but not all of us agree with the methods. Letting you discover the truth was the only way to expose what lies beyond this city's walls. I let you go because I knew you were the only one who could return." He pointed to the amulet she held, his face serious. "That amulet is the key to what remains of the second earth. But there's more. It still holds fragments of what you experienced there. The portal, though closed, will never be fully destroyed as long as the amulet exists. And now, Iris, it belongs to you." She gripped the amulet tighter, realizing that it was more than just a keepsake. It was the last connection to the world she had discovered, a sort of residual portal, an invisible and subtle passageway. Iris left Thomas's house carrying a new burden. She knew that, with the amulet, she possessed something the Order coveted, something they would never allow to fall into her hands again. At the same time, she felt tempted to explore what else the amulet might reveal. The second earth might not be completely lost, and Ethan's promise remained alive in her memory. Even without knowing exactly what the future would bring, Iris decided to go wherever the amulet led her, exploring every secret, every new possibility. She didn't know how far the journey would take her, but she was ready to find out. As she left the town, Iris noticed the amulet was growing warmer, as if responding to her movement. She smiled, knowing that this sensation was just the beginning. The amulet pulsed, and she felt as if a new door were opening, a window to what lay beyond. Even if she could never return to the second earth, the amulet gave her a glimpse of what there was still to explore. Maybe there were others like it, or perhaps there was still a connection between worlds, a chance to continue what Ethan and she had started. Walking away from the town, the amulet's glow guided her steps. She knew she was alone now, but the prospect didn't frighten her. She knew there was still so much to be discovered, so much to be uncovered, and that the Order's secrets wouldn't be safe as long as she was alive. With the amulet as her guide and Ethan's memory as her motivation, Iris set out in search of answers, feeling that her true journey was just beginning.